Hey everybody, welcome to the 2020 Vision Trends Report, coming to you live from Los Angeles. I'm Geoffrey, head of the Microsoft Advertising Brand Studio, and I'll be your host as we take a look inside a trends deck we put together at the Brand Studio at the end of last year. And joining me is my Microsoft colleague and co-author of the report, Aya Kikimova. Hey Aya, it's great to have you here in the city of the future, LA.
Hey Jeff, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So before we dive ahead into the future, let's take a look at the past decade and the 5 verticals that we looked at. What are those 5 verticals?
So the 5 verticals we looked at are culture, marketing, media, technology, and economics. And we're just going to talk about the 2 of them just to give a quick recap. So why don't we start with culture? We are all media. So Jeff, what do you think? What was going on in that particular trend?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was happening is we all were living in public. A lot of us were starting YouTube channels. We wanted to be Insta famous. We were even at the end of the decade becoming popular via TikTok. I think, that's a trend definitely spilling over into the 2020s that may influence how we actually, behave and react as a response.
I know you're trying to become LinkedIn famous.
I was trying to become LinkedIn famous a little bit. That is true in some respects. What's now another one, we look at media, 2 microphones and a Wi-Fi connection. That sort of ties into We Are Public. All of this technology is a lot cheaper, like what we're doing here. Has that led to that trend in the 2010s that allowed all of us to become famous in some respects?
Absolutely. This totally relates. And to me, this is more about the podcast. Anybody that I knew had their own podcast.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I was like, how are you making money off of podcasts? And they were like, it's not about that. It's just creating my own content. But I thought that was a great trend. And podcasting just blew out of the water and became such a huge trend. But beyond that in media, I mean, Wi-Fi just empowered everybody to become their own brand. And I feel like the podcasting was a huge part of it.
Yeah,
what do you think?
That definitely was a huge part of it. And it's going to be interesting to see when we look at the when we look at the 2020s, the next decade, what 5G may do to this area, because it might make the sort of Wi-Fi look antiquated, by design. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
Looking forward.
All right. So you ready to go over and are you ready to put your futurist cap on as we dive into the next decade?
Absolutely. My futurist cap is already on.
All right. Same here. My futurist headphones. All right, over the next hour or so, we're going to dive into 5 trends from our report and speak to some of the top experts in the marketing world about what all this means for your media planning and strategy, what behaviors, what technology, and what trends can help you navigate your creative output for your brand. We got a lot to dig into, and let's get started with trend number 1. For culture, we have identified private social trust as our trend. Culture is a huge barometer of how companies plan and perform. If you choose companies based on their commitment to the social good, should those companies be forthright about how they use their data? During this next decade, we think consumers will increasingly subscribe to the Betterness Manifesto, and brands will need to shift directions to win them over. For example, brands who support sustainability and produce climate-friendly products will prevail. All of this is leading to a movement of private social trust. So on this trend of private social trust, let's talk a little bit about the Betterment Manifesto. What should our viewers know about this so they have a better understanding of it?
Our viewers likely are practicing Betterment Manifesto. It's basically your manifesto to become better, a better human being, socially responsible person. And with that, it's all about the environment, how you are relating to others, etc. But what I would really like to go into is what Microsoft recently announced. Microsoft recently pledged that by 2030, we will become carbon neutral. And beyond that, we will continue to doing this work until we have removed all of the carbon footprint that we have placed onto this planet since 1975. And that is actually quite remarkable and leading cutting edge within the industry, because the rest of the world, so 87 companies that are worth over $2.3 trillion have committed to do the same, but by 2050. And Amazon has committed to do carbon neutrality by 2040. So Microsoft is way ahead of the game. And in that sense, I feel there is a huge commitment there, and that's one of the examples of the Betterment Manifesto being manifested.
You're saying carbon neutral. Wait, isn't it? I read it was carbon negative. That means, so it goes back to you saying you want to take all the carbon out of the ecosystem, not just be neutral in that respect.
Right. So neutral by 2030, and then continuing to until they have removed everything that was put out there since 1975.
So they're negating basically everything that they put out into the
Exactly.
environment. So when it comes to the Betterment Manifesto, do you think that the move that Microsoft made with wanting to go carbon negative plays to also the advantage of there being more transparent? So they're basically explaining to customers and partners where things are headed in terms of it's not just about, hey, how much revenue we're making, but a commitment to sort of the social good. How big of an area is this now for customers?
It is a huge focus for customers, I believe. But to your point, I do not think it's about transparency. I do think it's about building trust and building your brand and taking a stand for something that is important, especially in this world where climate change is being questioned by many political parties, but at the same time, it is an important topic. So Microsoft is definitely taking a stand there and going above and beyond the industry standard, not just carbon neutral, as you mentioned, but also carbon negative.
So culture, this trend, the big important word here is trust. That's what we should be focusing on for this next decade.
Absolutely. Using our research from the survey that we did, trust is a #1 factor in choosing a brand for consumers.
Yeah, very interesting. Great thing to look at. Culture, private, social, trust. For trend number 2, we go deep into one of my favorite subjects, marketing. And our trend that we have identified is something we're calling blocked you. Tracking and targeting customers is about to get a lot harder. And we have a guest who is at the forefront of marketing, where it's been and where it's going. Jamie Gutfreund is strategic advisor at Super Awesome, was chief experience officer at Hasbro, CMO for Wunderman Thompson and Deep Focus, and spent time at Microsoft. She's also my mentor and someone I go to when it comes to understanding where marketing is going. Jamie, welcome to the program.
Oh, I'm so honored. You didn't tell me that. I'm thrilled. Well, you're my mentor.
So we have this mutual
We have a
agreement.
mentor society.
I
Yes.
love it. I love hearing
it.
that.
Thank you.
Hey, so question on, where things are moving in this upcoming decade, tracking, targeting. How difficult is it going to be because of the regulation that's out there, the California Consumer Protection Act, as well as GDPR?
I don't think it's going to be difficult in the way that most people are terrified, because there are a lot of ways to understand it. What I think is challenging is, and we were talking about this before, there's a huge gap in what people understand and the legislation. That's the part that's really pretty challenging. No, I mean, how do you talk to kids? What kind of tracking information is allowed? What privacy requirements are going forward? It's the Wild West, and I think that that's where people are confused.
Yeah, it's interesting. On the area of, kids in the internet, Aya, you had a question for Jamie on this one.
Yes, actually, let's talk about something that nobody talks really about it. So you mentioned kids and the internet. So what are your thoughts? I mean, all of these new platforms are emerging, TikTok and Facebook and all of the other social media. How do you think the new trend will impact the kids and their ability to access internet?
I think if you go back into the dark days of when the internet was first launching, back in the Microsoft days, we had 14.4 dial-up, for those of you who remember. The internet was not created for anybody specifically. It just kind of happened, and for advertisers or for kids in particular. So nobody thought about kids, especially when the internet was sort of first around. So fast forward, here we are today, kids are watching less TV. They're watching more internet. Anybody who has a kid is just dying because their kid's on YouTube all the time, and that's just the way it is.
Oh, yeah.
And
Too much, maybe.
or just they don't understand how to guide it. So then these days, 40% of the entire user audience for the internet is kids. So it's an important audience, as well as if you see what's happening with kids, you see what's happening with everyone else. They always predict the future. So for those of you who are out there thinking, I don't care about kids, I sell cars, or I'm selling insurance, it does matter, because where they go, everyone goes.
Yeah, I would agree with that, because if you think about like how targeting works, they don't allow targeting to people under 13 because of different laws. And now that's playing out more into you can't target people regardless of what age they are based on, again, regulation or government rules on, hey, you can't just pinpoint an ad toward these people. You have to allow that ad to be seen by everyone who wants to apply to that job. So are you saying that we should pay more attention to this area of youth just so that we know where maybe the next 10 years might be going in terms of regulation?
Well, I think it's pretty amazing that governments were able to find a common ground and protect kids, thank goodness. And so it's actually not just 13 and under, it's 16 and under is where the new California Privacy Act and GDPR have. So it's probably safer for most brands to consider that they have to protect kids 16 and under. That's a lot of content. And I think that going forward, adults can see that this is possible. They may not know, we may not have a clear path on how to make it work, but if you can protect kids, why can't you protect an adult?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you're going to start to see a lot in contextual advertising, because it is possible. You don't have to know exactly who the person is to be able to add value. And I think that speaks to the fact that content is going to have to really be strong. This is the age of content, and contextual advertising, which is really interest-based, is going to be really leading the way in the next few years.
Now,
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about how those kids will be impacted 10 years down the road. So when they're 26, will they be bombarded all of a sudden by ads, and now they have to change their behavior? Or psychologically speaking, how do you think that will kind of unfold?
I think kids are going to grow up much more savvy consumers, because privacy is a conversation we all have. But funny enough, most people, especially kids, are willing to give up an enormous amount of data.
oh yeah.
But I think what's going to happen is the requirement for what you get back for giving up that information is going to be much more of an intrinsic sort of a quid pro quo. How might we say that these days? Because if I'm going to give you my data, I actually think, and what we're seeing in a lot of the research is that people don't necessarily mind if you get value.
Yeah.
What the controversy is, and this is why YouTube had this huge fine, was because kids were being tracked without parental consent.
Yep.
Parents can consent. And there's a lot of issues, for example, in school, kids are using technology and they're being tracked. That's a gray area. But if a kid or a child is engaging with a brand and it's value add and the parents have agreed, then that's okay. We have a lot of clients. It's Super Awesome is an amazing company that's making the internet safe for kids. And there are really fantastic ways that brands can interact with kids in a safe way, but parents have to be consenting, or you have to have zero data.
What you just shared there took me back when Facebook was first launched in 2004. I remember I was in college and nobody knew about the privacy. That was not even a thing. And everybody posted everything and your digital footprint. Nobody knew that it was forever. So it was just such a new, insane trend. But now it's all going back into just contracting.
I mean, I hear people talking, brands and marketers just are panicked because of cookies, but let's face it, cookies are 25 years old.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty confident with all the smart people out there around the world, we'll find something to replace cookies. It's just, cookies are technically kind of lazy, but you're right, we didn't know. We don't know what we don't know now, as a matter of fact. So I also remember when Facebook first started, people were lying about their age. So you've got a lot of people out there it says that they're 26, but they're really much younger because they said that they were old enough. And I think that's another thing we're going to start to see, is that the age gating has been all about the site saying to the kid, hey, do you verify that you're 13 and over? And everyone just clicks a box and says, yeah, I am. Going down the road, it may be the responsibility of the publishers to determine that, yes, in fact, like a driver's license or cigarettes or alcohol, that I am, in fact, 13 or 16.
I see that totally happening because right now it is just you click a box, you enter, you're able to do it. But then I could see almost, maybe I'm wrong here, someone suing. It's always, lawsuits always change everything, where someone says, I didn't allow my child to go on there, but they hacked their way in. I'm now suing you because you didn't put up enough of a restriction here to get into this ecosystem, which then puts the onus back on these publishers to say, all right, yeah, we have to figure out ID verification.
That's all happening. All these conversations are happening. I think the good news is we can't lose track of it. It's actually good for kids. And this is one of those things that should happen. But kids having access to great content is also important. So how do you get around the idea that kids that have access to subscription only versus video on demand, if you have SVOD versus AVOD, does that mean that kids will not see content unless it's advertising driven? Or are they going to see content that they can only afford if it's streaming, if it's not subscriber based? It's going to be a really interesting time for content creators and publishers. And I think the content creators who've done a really good job in the last few years of amassing these massive audiences, they're going to figure out a way to, whether it's to go to different platforms, you're going to see new platforms arising, not just YouTube. And where there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah. That leads to my final question, and this term you and I were talking about, change pornography.
Yeah.
A shout out to Mark Ritson, who actually came up with the term. What does that mean, and how does that apply in this sort of blocked you ecosystem?
I love that phrase. I saw that, and we had a good chuckle about it. Big shout out to Mark Ritson. I think in terms of what we're seeing now with all the unicorns, and you guys talked about this in your report, it's not enough to have a great idea and to build scale and top-line revenue. There's this thing called profitability. And so all of these newfangled marketing concepts that everyone got excited about, at the end of the day, sometimes it just really comes back to the fundamentals. Do you know your audience? Do you have a superior product? It's the 4 Ps, right? Let's all go back to the basics. Yeah. And the idea of change pornography is the idea that just because I can talk about programmatic to the nth degree and let's see. I can find a guy that lives in Seattle that works for a high-tech company that is balding, has a book. I can micro-target you.
You're referring to me.
Oh, well, just a little bit.
That's Jeff.
But so I can micro-target you. Is that efficient? Does that mean anything? Or were you going to buy that product anyway?
That's right. Yeah.
And that's part of the thing. I mean, just because I can doesn't mean I should. And I think that the idea of change pornography is fascinating because people get very excited about bright, shiny objects. Where I think we're going to is just like everything. The pendulum swung from one end to another, and now we're starting to see things coming back in the middle. And like, if you look at like a Casper, for example, I think the mattress industry is such a microcosm for marketing in general.
Yeah.
They have stores. They have ads on TV. Those are not necessarily newfangled ideas. Those are basics.
Oh, geez. Our producer, Jonathan, ask him when you get off set about what it's like to buy a mattress. He can't escape the ads now, even though he bought one a while ago.
Exactly. Retargeting. Is it effective? Is it effective? I don't know. Maybe not. As opposed to if you go to a website and it says, I can't sleep.
Yes.
That's my website. The I can't sleep website. Yeah, that's probably a good place to put your mattress ads.
Yeah. Hey, well, wise words from you. Always great to see you. Thanks for joining us here on the program.
Great to be here.
Jamie Gutfreund here with us on 2020 Vision. For trend number 3, we're going to look at the future of media and a trend we're calling mashups and mutations. We see traditional media and even original digital media mutating, converging, and consolidating to create new offerings. And to help us make sense of this, we welcome another esteemed guest on the forefront of emerging media. Lizzie Widhelm is Senior Vice President of Ad Innovation at Pandora, dabbling in the world of audio meets video meets whatever comes next. Lizzie, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I have to ask you this question because in the past decade, everyone was media. Everyone was dabbling and creating all these new things. Podcasts, everyone seemed to have one. If you were breathing, you had a podcast. But in this new era, are we going to just see more of a return to high-end content because people just don't have time to do all the things that we think they have to do when it comes to watching or listening?
I don't know if high-end is the way to describe it. I feel like authenticity in the message is coming back to be very important. When you think about, I believe when you think about why podcasting has become so popular, is because people inherently want to be in a community of people that are like them. We say we want diversity and difference, but at the end of the day, it's about community and it's about reconnecting, and podcasts offer that, right? Music also offers that. So I don't think it's going to be about like, is it high quality or not? It's just like, does it have a connection to an audience that loves it enough to want to commit to it and drive not just time, but attention, recurring attention? Because the bigger issue is actually the monetization to keep it all going. I mean, it's fun to do podcasts. I've done one.
I do one.
You do one?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Sure, you
Yes,
listen
I
and
no,
are
I have started
I'd love
one.
to listen. Yeah,
I was going to
starting
start one.
one.
Yes, yeah. So
Yeah, and if you have the time, great, and you're really passionate about something, but very few people are actually making good money in it.
yeah.
And so I think that that'll be the real test. Can they all stick around? Will we still have as much diversity in all of these messages, or will it end up looking a little bit like network TV? You know, 4 or 5 big players in the scripted space, 4 or 5 big players in the interviewer space.
That brings up a question. Will it look like old media again? So we were at CES and we met with all these streaming companies. I mean, you couldn't look left or right without a streaming company. I mean, I feel like I should go start a streaming company with a sign right now.
What are you going to call it?
I don't know. I'll figure something out. I'll stand out here
Streaming
in
Jeff.
downtown LA. And all of them were lean back experiences. It was like cable, but for the internet. I mean, explain this to us, because are we going back to an era where we were in a lean back experience, then we were in a lean in experience, now we're in a lean back experience? I mean, when I get in my car, I just want to turn on Sirius, listen to Mad Dog Sports, drive to work. I don't want to have to deal with like figuring out a playlist. Has that gone away, or is that something that has always been with us?
I feel like it's just cable again, what you said. I mean, at first it was you would go to 1 or 2 streamers, and that was the cut cord experience, and it was all sort of there, and then you had to decide who were you going to pay. Were you going to be a Netflix plus Hulu plus then HBO put their product out? And now I'm actually really worried about subscription fatigue.
Yeah.
You've got, you cut your cable, hopefully, at this point, and you were paying, let's say you're paying $110,
Yep.
right? It's pretty easy to get to $100 fast with Disney Plus, Netflix, Hulu, so you can get your local, throw in a Spotify, Pandora, throw in a Sirius. I mean, you're back up to upwards of $100 for entertainment again. So, we're thinking a lot, and Pandora is built on the free business model, right? We've been about, yes, we have a subscription product. It fully competes with Spotify. We love SiriusXM and what it offers in terms of its subscription, but we have to have a free service. And so it'll be interesting to reach real mass, right? To really reach over 110 million customers a month that we touch. You have to have an ad-supported service. So the real question will be, what does advertising start looking like in these streaming services that are currently video and not ad-supported? Because I think they're going to have to.
Yeah.
You're going to see brands showing up in that space. And then it really is cable all over again.
It is cable all over
It's
again.
like 1981.
Yes, everything is a remix. We
Bob
talk about
Iger's
that
going to
quite
be
a
good
bit.
at it. He's already done it once before.
Hey, speaking of ad formats, you had a question for Lizzie on this.
I do, yes. You mentioned monetization of this free service, and you are also head of ad innovation at Pandora. So could you tell us a little bit more about the new ad formats that you're testing? Did you mention something about the innovative,
interactive. We're doing voice
ads?
step.
Yes.
Well, the interesting thing that you saw at CES, which none of us could ignore, is screenless connectivity and specific to audio, right?
Yes.
So think
Yeah.
of a world where 5G is here. It's going to happen. We thought it was last year. It's definitely going to happen this year. I believe that. All of these little devices coming online, all of them benefiting when they are screenless towards an audio experience, right? So we started really thinking about voice ads and interactive ads, and what does that look like to present a customer with the opportunity to engage with a brand and have a conversation. Now, many people take that immediately to like AI and I'm going to have a conversation with a robot, and we're actually starting in a really simple place. It's just, in some ways, permission to hear more. So an ad would say, hey, you're listening to a new type of ad, you can talk back to it. And then in an example we have with one of these products, which I love so much, it's a food product. They deliver the setup for a joke, and then we open the mic, which we get permission for and all that fun stuff. And you say, yes, would you like to hear the punchline of the joke, yes or no? And then the brand comes back and gives you the punchline. And what I love about this ad is it's not driving to retail, right? It's not driving some feature value or benefit or the basics of what you try to think about in a marketing message. But it's just connecting with the human and that neurological thing that happens when you laugh. Like when you're awake, not just giving time to that brand, but really giving time and attention, which we believe is the secret sauce. And I want to come back to buying time versus buying attention, because I think there's an interesting shift coming there. But yeah, we've been testing all these interactive ads. Some are funny, some are not so funny, and we're really more just like spoken display ads.
Yeah.
And they didn't perform well at all, to be honest. So I just think I meet with brands and they talk a lot about humanity. They talk a lot about authenticity. They talk a lot about brand personality and sonic identity. And how do we connect with consumers in a way that we're having a human relationship with each other versus just a transactional one. And I think interactive ads and some of the future there will be really sort of humanizing the connection if you do it right. So I'm excited about it.
I like that though, because it almost moves away from what's existed the last 10 years, which is like, what's the performance?
Overdrive.
What's the automation? What's this? And it gets back to the heart of like, let's just make people laugh. Let's make them feel human. Let's have them interact with this message, which is, it's just so different from where the industry has been the past decade.
Yeah. And it'll require, we're thinking about data and what we collect there and what we try to understand. And it's going to be challenged to get that ad. The thing I worry most about actually is that ad, I'm the marketer and let's say you're the consumer. And we have this moment that felt good for you.
Feels great.
Right? And, and then you go back to your music or whatever you were listening to. Is it going to stand up against the last click attribution model? Is it going to stand up against their really, sadly, tired ways of understanding human behavior? That's going to be the worst part, is I hope it doesn't hit the cutting room floor because it's such a fun way to interact, because it doesn't stack up against the blocking and tackling and sort of abuse that goes on in the space today.
That just feels so closely related to what we talked about the private social trust and just building that connection with the consumer and also going for the long haul, that relationship that builds over time. Do you think that, laughter is one of the initial aspects of building that trust? Is that a main part of your interactive ads?
I don't think it's necessarily about laughter. I think attention and making sure the brain is lit up is important. I think that we all are dealing with the same time. We never know when it's up, but we know how much we have every day, right?
Yep.
Like it's the human resource. It is not changing. Yet many of us go through time without attaching attention to that time. And marketers really do need your attention in order to change your behavior. It's not easy to get someone to go from, Tide to whatever the competitor is, or Casper to whatever the competitor is.
Purple. Tuft and
exactly.
Needle. Yeah.
And so I think that some of these, going back to some of the early tricks of actually what was beautiful about the early days of TV, is getting the brain to tap into some sort of an emotive moment will have more durability for advertising, right? You will remember it. Like there's real science behind what your brain does when you're laughing. You're actually tuned in versus just sort of meandering through the day. So I think in some ways it's all connected. It's just, will everyone be patient enough to let it prove out? Right?
Yeah. Also, will people even see or hear some of these things? That's always my question for many people like yourself is, we almost have this subscription model which says, hey, it's a lower subscription and we have ads, but you could pay the higher tier and never hear any ads. So how do we handle that world where we may have a lot of people who are paying a poor tax being forced ads and a lot of people in the 1% who never hear or see any ads?
It's a reality.
Yeah. We're almost like basically not wanting to reach the consumer who actually has some wealth to spend on companies.
It's why I love my role in that I am dealing with more than 90% of the Pandora listeners that do choose to pay with their time versus their money. I've been doing it for 14 years, and our team, and I'm proud of the fact that we haven't seen that change too much. It means we're doing something right in terms of not pissing them off, but we have to really stay ahead of what that feels like. We have a bunch of new testing we're doing outside of voice specific to ads unlocking value and really being overt about it. I think there's a huge future around more data coming from the customer to the publisher in return for a better content experience. I think that we'll see how everybody resets around the new privacy rules and how they're going to house data. But I actually think customers, again, if you come correct, if you really do deliver the better experience, I mean, how many times have you filled a survey and you're like, I hate you, and then you never hear from them?
Yep.
Or you give data and you can tell they're doing nothing with it, right?
Oh man.
So I think if you do it right, there's going to be upside to maybe bringing more. I call it the play wall, like bringing more great things that currently live behind the paywall for the 1% forward. Will there still be a world where maybe if you are that ad-supported customer everywhere you go, that you're having to kind of move the market for all of those people that actually should be spending their money on the product they don't know about? That's a little scary.
Pandora in radio, online radio, and digital radio is catering towards people, through one of the senses, right, is the hearing. Are you ever seeing the mashup, I guess, of the visual or other types of senses within that ad format in the future?
Yeah. We, it's device specific. So much of our growth is in the connected home and connected car. And I'm actually dealing with a challenge right now where the earbud generation was 1-to-1, right? We were leveraging data to take the role of this single relationship you and I are having in delivering a really targeted ad. We're finding that the connected home experience is 1-to-some, and the connected car experience where it's trending will be 1-to-some. And then you think about format. Well, video in the car makes no sense today, but it makes a lot of sense in the future. So we're starting to dig into that, as well as commerce, transacting in the car. So we are the last mile and wallet payment structure built into the car. And I think that'll be interesting. But, inherently, we're not serving a lot of video in moments where someone is not watching their device, nor does it even have it.
So that's more like 2030,
2030,
2050.
We have a really, and then there are some, Howard Stern's a really good example of someone that was audio only, and then we added video for him a couple years ago.
This is actually all been influenced by Howard Stern. He did this eons. We're just remixing what he did.
His video content does so well on our Sirius app, on YouTube, and I think it does strengthen the connection he has with his listeners and the engagement. So video, there's a place for video in audio. There's a place for video ads, device specific. We have them. I'm not to say we don't. And I think there's a growth in the future for video in front of audio content and for more video content in and around music and spoken word. But we just have to kind of wait and see how those behaviors at scale too.
I love it. Lizzie Widhelm, Senior Vice President, Ad Innovation at Pandora. Thanks for joining us here on 2020 Vision. Our vertical for trend number 4 is technology, and we're calling this trend the victory of defaults. It's all about the buyer's journey. For this topic, our guest is Lucie Greene of Lightyears. She's a forecaster, strategist, and author specializing in cultural trends, consumer insight, and brand innovation based here in Los Angeles. Lucie, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I just saw you at CES. It's great to see you in such a short period of time again.
I know, I get to see you all the time now.
I love it. And I guess I should say you're moving back to New York. Awesome. So it's like interesting in the sense that it leads into my first question, which is, you're in this building in New York and they ask you questions like, do you have a dog walker? Do you have this delivery service? Do you have these other things? Are buildings now entering this trend of being this victory of defaults where they're asking what your habits or behaviors are so they can make sure those services are delivered to you?
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean, I'm moving into essentially a sort of millennial crash, right? A daycare center. But on a sort of more analytical front, it's kind of the building as service, right? And
Wow.
as an ecosystem of touch points, and they've built the relationships, they're getting to know you, they're getting that data pool, and they're making it so, the reward is that they make it super convenient. So they will hook up your internet for you. They know when your birthday is. So the tentacles and the way in which they're getting to know inhabitants is becoming like an ongoing concierge.
So Aya, in the report, and again, for those watching, you can download it at blog.microsoftadvertising.com. What were you trying to get at this one, so that maybe our audience understands what the victory of defaults means?
Absolutely. So it's all about the buyer's journey, as you mentioned earlier, and the brands that will essentially embrace the customer experience and put customer first and get to know them on a personal level and develop those long-term relationships will become the default for them. From the technological perspective, the space is so saturated. I mean, look at the search engine results page. There's so many ads, right? And there's so many ads that we're being served on a daily basis just across all different platforms. So it is so difficult as a consumer to pick one brand. You just get bombarded by all this information and content. So in that regard, how do you pick something that you trust and something that you have maybe tried or willing to try? Or is technology going to be there to help you pick it? So are the algorithms going to develop in a way that are defaulting to that brand that is most likely to benefit you?
Yeah.
Right.
How do you answer that one?
Well, I mean, we're seeing it in, Amazon for me is one of the ultimate default brands, right? I would probably buy a house through Amazon based on the level of trust that I have with it. And like, if it is moving into bank accounts, I'd probably bank with it. I really trust with it. And it's created this, not only a virtuous ecosystem of services, but a virtuous ecosystem of ease. Like the fact that everything is so intuitively interlinked. It's sort of interconnected for me with my Amex. So Amex is another one that has created this ecosystem of like-minded brands that make it super easy to sort of flip between the two and get benefits. It creates this default loyalty as well as ease. So yeah, seeing more and more of that.
Hey, question for you on this, because I think a lot of times when we look at like a technology trend, people are like, okay, what's the tech that powers it? Well, my question here is really more on the creativity around it. Like, how are people tapping more into defaults? Is it around creative imagery? Is it around lifestyle? Before we were on camera here, we were talking a little bit about some of those brands out there that are using more inclusivity to drive defaults. I mean, talk a little bit more about that, how that plays into it, that this isn't just a pure data tech play.
No, I think it's also more personalization and trying to create sort of more emotional bonds with the user and therefore create more loyalty. So it's that combination of ease and emotion, I think, and sort of knowing who you are and anticipating what you might want in a non-creepy way, like as in with like interesting content or recommendations that really are intuitively suited to you.
Yeah.
Do you think Tom Cruise is creepy?
Yeah, that's a question. Yeah, I guess because, what was that quote about big tech and Tom Cruise?
Oh, I've been talking a lot about like big tech's reputation, just generally. I feel like you talked about this with your zebra trend versus unicorns, but just this idea that like big tech, when you think about it, used to have this really sort of ironclad control over its narrative of being, transformative, positive, saving the world, changing the world for the better, building the future. And I joke that like it no longer has that control over its narrative. The sort of the veil has been lifted, and it's like Tom Cruise. It can't control its image anymore. So and it's open season now. We can criticize it, and I've been looking at this particularly from a talent point of view recently. When you think about even sort of 5 years ago, if you graduated from university, the only place you would want to work in as synonymous with the future would be like a Facebook, a Google, an Instagram. And in quite a short time, that has really shifted, and it's partly to do with ethics. We saw research in the UK recently talking about tech workers who have even left jobs because they don't feel that they're able to scenario plan the ethical consequences of what they create in the tech space. But I also think it's sort of representative of a shift in millennial attitudes to work. Like after a decade of killing themselves, millennials are sort of burnt out and don't want to work on weekends, even if there is a gym and free pizza, right? They want to work with somewhere where they can make an impact. And the reality is these organizations are so huge, and in fact quite corporate for all the sort of ukuleles that they've played alongside their promotional videos for a long time. So I think that the brand narrative from a talent point of view, from a product standpoint, is really shifted with that group.
So, I mean, like this trend of victory of defaults, even the hiring mechanisms changes in terms of this isn't just a consumer play. This is also like a recruiting play, how companies have to position themselves for future recruits. Would you say that I'm correct in assuming that?
Yeah, I think the lines between consumer brand and talent brand are completely intertwined now. And so the way you position yourself to consumers, it really impacts like how desirable you are to work for. So like TikTok is obviously hugely cool. It's not affecting elections in a negative way, or so we hope. And but it's also associated with innovation, and so people are using it because they find it incredibly fun and engaging. But it also, therefore, I think, has a default rainbow effect in making it a really cool place for that teenagers or young people might want to work.
Yeah, that's interesting. Question in terms of, we saw each other at CES recently, and we're talking about, some people don't want to work themselves to death. That ties into a lot of tech we saw that was there in terms of, how people basically are, I guess, instead of FOMO, it's like JOMO, joy of missing out. I mean, talk a little bit more about how some of this tech, which could be a default in the next 10 years, is starting to evolve.
Well, you're seeing, of course, this like explosion of well-being tech, and I would connect that just generally to this era of anxiety and unease about the world around us, right? In recent years at CES, which I see as the bellwether to what, or a window into consumers' view of the world and what is making them anxious, what they're worried about, and what they want. And so we've not only seen the proliferation of well-being gadgets that help people measure and self-optimize and that feed into basically lifestyle as a form of preventative healthcare, right, from chronic disease. But you've also seen a whole number of offshoots of that, like blurring into sort of environmental concerns, security concerns. So water purifiers that you can have on a key ring, air purifiers, pollution monitors, masks that are connected for when you're cycling to tell you when you're encountering too much pollution, home devices that are using sensors. You can measure now that like how prone your house might be to a natural or ecological disaster. There's a whole load of gadgets that are really sort of, I see it sort of driven by consumers wanting to fortify themselves against the world around them and potential economic, health, or political unease or social unrest. Everything is sort of protective, which is really interesting.
It sounds like we're becoming preppers, even if we don't want to be preppers. Is that what you're getting at?
Yep. Yeah, I would say
All
so.
right. Hey, I have a final question for you in terms of inclusive marketing. It's now, I assume, the default. It is the industry standard. What's your comment on that?
Yeah, I think it really is. And that's really being driven by a very outspoken teenagers and young millennials who are really becoming very cognizant of the visual images that they're presented with, very outspoken on social media, very sophisticated in how they address lazy stereotyping or imagery, and really demanding that brands are representative. So whether that's body type, whether that's ethnicity, whether that's showing acne, so CVS has already taken action and stopped airbrushing acne out of images, multiple aged representation. And that's going a stage further as well to really recognizing the importance of having diverse teams creating marketing and advertising, and how that actually can make it even better, and at the very worst, or at the very least, avoid calamitous errors that result in sort of call-out cancel culture, right?
I think that's really interesting. And to me, I think the whole conversation here about technology wraps up to technology is very powerful and it's a conduit, but essentially the driving force behind it will determine whether it's positive or negative. So in that sense, it can drive diversity and inclusion. It can drive all of these benefits to the consumers. On the other hand, if it's poorly executed and used in the wrong way, perhaps it can actually negate that impact.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a rising recognition and understanding of inherent biases in artificial intelligence and visual recognition. Really the fact that we've inherited this whole internet space that has been sort of architected by a very singular demographic or type of person, normally a white man, sorry. But
They're definitely men.
And how when systems go engage with people on a mass level, like how calamitous that can be. So you're already seeing Whitney Wolf, the CEO of Bumble, for example, has been talking about this idea of the female internet. Like, what if we redesigned the internet with a female lens from the ground up, right? You're seeing a lot more organizations looking at bias in AI and on social media platforms in more detail. So Amnesty International actually did a piece of research looking at Twitter recently and the level of misogyny experienced by women on Twitter. And they coined the phrase digital violence, which I think is really interesting as an idea. But the other area which I think is actually being really, or technology and AI and data analytics is becoming really used positively is in the streaming space. So when you think about it, when cable TV, like the viewing figures used to be fairly, compared to now, fairly nebulous, but the amount of data being that these companies have access to about who is watching stuff, what is a hit, what pools of consumers that they haven't recognized, and that could present real opportunities, that the data has played a really positive role in terms of driving this diversity wave in Hollywood, which is late. But even you have like actresses like Reese Witherspoon saying it's transformed her earning potential because now you have like very nuanced, credible data. Google has been doing some interesting work with the Gina Davis Foundation using visual analytics and verbal analytics as well to measure how often female protagonists are speaking, how loud they are, how often they're featured in entertainment. So we're almost seeing entertainment ahead of marketing in this space.
That's fascinating, especially because for years it was like you had the numbers, but you just didn't know who was behind them. So the streaming data is really important because it's like, hey, we can see that X amount of people streamed this. Those people were in these geolocations and were 70% female. I mean, it's all the things that we've basically been talking about from a content standpoint that, now you can develop things that actually are, you're using real data in that respect that it just didn't exist for a very long period of time.
Right, and to their credit, studios are actually really making decisive action on this. So you're seeing in 2020 like real diversity in mass market entertainment vehicles. Marvel embracing LGBTQ heroes, more progressive images and portrayals of
awards
female
too.
Heroes. Right, and awards needed to go a little bit of a way, but
but wasn't that the first time that non-American, or I guess like non-white female won was a Golden Globes?
Sure, but
Wait,
then
for
you
which
have
one, which category? Wait, for what
For
again?
the movies. I'm just talking about the Hollywood.
Remind me who won again?
It was for the movie. It was a comedy series. Totally blanking
Fleabag?
now. No,
No,
not
it
the
wasn't
Fleabag.
Fleabag.
It was this
No.
Asian girl. She won, and then
Aquafina.
Aquafina.
Oh yeah, okay,
Yes.
okay,
And
yes.
then also was it an Asian movie that won?
Parasite.
Parasite
Yeah, that
was
movie's like
also-
the movie of the year.
yeah.
Yeah, for
Sure, I mean,
2019.
I feel like entertainment is moving faster than the awards system.
Yeah.
There's still massive gaps in representation and I think it genuinely is starting to affect the relevance of things like the Oscars, that they're not recognizing talent that has clearly been really successful and done brilliant things.
And also I wanted to mention, as we're speaking about inclusion, that Microsoft has made a commitment to inclusion as well, with Satya Nadella obviously leading the charge. And last year, inclusion became a part of how we get rewarded. So everybody, 140,000 employees around the world are taking actions and steps towards inclusion. So yeah, I'm really excited about the big tech really moving in that direction.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it's impressive that, I mean, because that's what it needs. It needs sort of systemic, proactive action, really.
Systemic change. Lucie Greene from Light Years, always great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Good to see you
you.
twice in a row.
Right, I'll see you at Vegas next year.
Awesome. Lucie Greene here on the 2020 Vision Report. Just a reminder, if you like what you are watching, you can download the full 2020 Vision Trends for the Next Decade report at blog.microsoftadvertising.com, and make sure you read Aya's personal trend and my personal trend in that report. And our fifth and final bucket is economics, and this is our favorite. We're calling this trend Zebras Eat Unicorns. Disruptive business models from the 2010s centered around automated design and lacked human elements. As a result, the rise of unicorns may give way to a new model or animal that isn't fictitious. Zebras. Aya. This is a really fun one, and it's one we've talked about a lot when we were doing the research. What is this whole area? What are zebras? What do they represent? Why are they so important in the 2020s?
Well, zebras are those that are essentially have a very sound business model. They're not grabbing all that venture capital and running with that money and growing rapidly without proving any results, any profits, and looking for an exit strategy. They are in for the long haul. Compared to that, unicorns are really, what they are. They're just trying to grow fast, trying to acquire all that capital and try to run with it. And the goal is to be bought by another big conglomerate or to have an exit strategy that is essentially allows them to exit quickly.
Would you say this is like the pendulum swinging back? Because for the last decade, it was growth at any cost. And now we're seeing people say, hey, wait a minute. Let's take a step back and actually, maybe it isn't growth at any cost. Maybe it's sustainability. Maybe it's a company that lasts for 10, 20, 30 years rather than a short shelf life. Is that the right thing for me to say?
I agree. I think the pendulum is swinging backwards now. We are certainly have been in the period of rapid growth, even economically speaking, right? We have been expanding, the interest rates have been going down, and we're still kind of in that expansionary period. However, all the economic trends and the economic ratios are showing that in the long term, we are starting to see a little bit of a contraction. So in that sense, we are going to be looking for those companies that have a business model that is growing consistently, slowly, and long term, in 10 years, 20 years, we are going to see them still available on the market rather than, having a brand that's be like, what's that brand?
Yeah. Some of the examples of zebras that we found in our research: Tomboy X, their unisex apparel, and Rock My Run. This is like Spotify for athletic and performance endurance music. So it's like, these are niche. That's the other thing about zebras. They're niche. A lot of them are people, I would say, that were ignored by VCs. Women entrepreneurs, people of color. So this also I have to ask the inclusivity question. Zebras are coming back basically to eat the unicorns because it's like, hey, you didn't want us to be part of the party. Now we're just going to sort of take over the show.
Totally. And actually, last Wednesday, I was at a Microsoft for Startups organized event. It was for women, and there was a bunch of panelists. And one of them was a VC, and one of them obviously was an accelerator, but it was geared towards women in the startup environment. And there was a question posed from the audience. This woman, she had this brilliant idea, and it was a manufacturing process that was unique to her. And she had already customers lined up. But when she would pitch to VCs, obviously she would not get through. Actually, the numbers show that only 3% of women get venture capital funded. So in that sense, yes, that segment of the population is being pushed into being zebras. But that's a good thing, I think, because you're not relying on that extra money, having extra expectations to grow fast and become profitable in a year or two. Rather, you have the long-term goal and you're growing naturally with the revenue, and your business model is being proven by the demand.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of how my great-grandparents built their sort of small businesses, like slow and steady wins the race rather than growth at all costs. So fascinating stuff. Zebras eat unicorns. Okay, that's going to do it for our special report, 2020 Vision Trends to Define the Next Decade. Thanks to all of our guests, Jamie Gutfreund, Lizzie Widhelm, and Lucie Greene. And thanks to my colleague and co-author, Aya Kikimova.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me.
And you can download our full 2020 Vision Trends for the Next Decade report at blog.microsoftadvertising.com. From all of us here at Microsoft Advertising in downtown Los Angeles, thanks again.